So when you see this blizzard and this video, you will perhaps immediately think that so winter has come, and that must be why you have so much ice in the fjord, in the sea. But this is one of the big counterintuitive things up here in Greenland, that although you have a sea full of ice, or you have ice floating around in the fjord, this is not sea ice. This is actually land ice from the glacier, the bottom of the Nuuk fjord. And as a matter of fact, I haven't seen a single case of sea ice for all the 15 months I've been in Greenland this far. But there is actually some truth to the point that winter is coming, and therefore you see this beautiful blue ice out in the fjord. And that point is that you have a, let's say, 100 or 150 kilometer long fjord from all the way from here on the west coast and into the inland ice, where the Greenland ice sheet resides on top. And all of this ice comes from the inland ice sheet, and it all through spring and summer and autumn, it moves out. It calves off the glacier and it moves out towards the ocean, out through the Nuuk fjord. But in spring and early summer, most of the ice actually melts out during its journey through the fjord. So it's actually only now in October that you really get a lot of icebergs floating in the fjord. That's because the ocean water is slightly cooler, so more of the bergs that calve off the glacier can actually survive all the way out to Nuuk and to this beautiful beach. But as I said, this is not sea ice, this is land ice. And the thing about sea ice is that sea ice is formed on the sea from salt water, more or less salty water. But when these bergs are already out at sea, they are of course counted as sea ice by the satellites and by the computer algorithms, because it's really kind of hard to say where this ice formed originally, and it mixes up with the sea ice also eventually. So I had one day here last February where there was some tendency to form pancake ice on the fjord, but all that was just swept away and melted out the very next morning. So it's like it just doesn't stick, the sea ice up here. So back to the insanely deceptive IPCC report. I mentioned sea ice volume already in the first part, and so amazingly you don't have in the latest UN climate panel report for the 1.5 degrees, you have no mention of the fact that last year, 2017, was the lowest year for sea ice or sea ice volume ever on record. They don't mention that at all, even though sea ice in the Arctic, of course, is a key indicator of how fast we are warming this planet. And of course, I didn't even mention the fact that the year before that, in 2016, we had the lowest year for sea ice extent, which otherwise, extent is otherwise the pet measure, the pet category for the IPCC, whenever they talk about sea ice, they talk about two-dimensional sea ice extent, because that's not collapsing nowhere as fast as sea ice volume and thickness. But I don't even mention the fact that 2016 was the lowest year for sea ice extent. So over to the more serious failings of the IPCC report, or it's failing, according to what we expect from it, but of course it's not failing according to what their handlers tell them to report about. But this 1.5 degree report, they never tell us in the report itself, or in the summaries or anywhere. And of course they don't tell us in the press, in the popular press, when it's not even in the report. So they never tell us why they come out with this report, or why a limit for 1.5 or 2C is a limit. They seem to have forgotten about that completely. And for those of us who have a memory like an elephant, we can remember more than 1 year back in time, there was a point in time where they would talk about a limit at 1 degree or 1.5 degree or 2 degree Celsius warming since pre-industrial. That was an important tipping point or limit that we should not cross, not just because it will be more flooding and more droughts and more hurricanes, stronger hurricanes and all that, or more sea level rise, but because it's the border between just unpleasant climate change, like too hot in many parts of the world, and a lost cause, a self-reinforcing, what's the word for that? A one-way street to a warmer world. They don't talk about that at all. So it's just like they have this UN dog and pony show where they talk about 1.5C, or we should limit our emissions, blah blah, and 1.5 is less severe than 2.0. Duh, of course. But they never go into the fact that if we get to a point more than 1.5 or whatever the scientific number would be, then you will not have a temperature graph for the globe that will peak at some point, flat line, and then go down again afterwards. But you will have a steadily increasing global temperature for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, millennia, and it will go up and up and up until you have no ice at all on the planet. So this new IPCC report seems to have forgotten, the whole reason for setting an upper limit for temperature increase, and they don't like to talk about climate feedbacks. Like if you get this much warmer, all the ice will go, and that will release methane, and we will go warmer and warmer, and then we will lose all the methane in the permafrost in Siberia and in Canada and in Alaska and in Greenland. They don't like to talk about that because that's unpleasant. So that's why it's deceptive, and you shouldn't really believe anything from the headline of the report to the footnotes. You shouldn't believe anything in that report, because they basically just want you to be a little bit worried about the climate and maybe pay a little more for your gasoline, but basically just go about your life. And this is like, this whole climate issue is as important or as unimportant as the question of whether or not you should have free school lunch for children in your local school. And that's sort of where they want to place the whole climate debate. It's unimportant. This will be something for your grandchildren to worry about, and by then they will probably run their cars on palm oil, destroying the rainforest instead. And basically this is, nothing to see here. Move along. All right, that's Talking South for this week, and please subscribe to my channel when you finish watching this. And as I said, next Wednesday, we will have Jennifer Hines, the maker of 2 big documentary films about the methane monster, or the methane bomb, in our near future. So tune in Wednesday night at about 9 o'clock Greenland time. I can't remember all the other time zones. Okay.